I want to go back to every corner of the earth that I've been to already and that I haven't been to already. I want to photograph type 1 diabetics that would never have a chance to share their story. That's what I'm most passionate about, is going to these people that aren't necessarily on social media and can post something and relate to other people, or go on and see to relate to other people. I want to be able to share their stories. And so that's another reason why I incorporated as a nonprofit, was to raise money and to be able to travel to these places. So as much as I want to conquer LA and travel the rest of the US and continue this project, I want to go back to these Bedouin villages and show these kids with the disease too, and show them how many others there are like them.
That was Laura Pavlakovich, and this is episode 10 of the Bravest Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome to episode 10 of the Bravest Podcast. We have made it to double digits with the show, and it has definitely been a very cool ride so far. Now, if you've been with me over the past few months, you've heard conversations that I've had with an athlete who's run straight across the U.S. from San Diego to New York City. I've spent time with a plant-based Whole Foods duo who taught us all about the benefits of reducing, or actually eliminating, animal products from our diet. We've learned from a psychologist, and we've even spent time meditating with a yogi. And as I said at the top of the last podcast, I am super grateful for all of you guys, and I look forward to providing you with an increasingly valuable resource as time goes forward. Now, this episode is a little different than the typical health and wellness conversations we've had so far on the show. But that said, there are significant ties to our health, to living well, and ultimately making a significant impact on our world. All of those things are central to my reason for creating The Bravest Life and The Bravest Podcast in the first place. Now, our guest for today, Laura Pavlakovich, is a creative at heart, but her true path was not presented to her until she, as she describes it, escaped the bubble of life in a comfortable Southern California town. And while Laura was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes around the age of 4, for many years she worked very hard not to allow it to define her. Now, I think that most of us would agree that we should not be fully defined by something such as an autoimmune disease, but it's interesting how the very thing she turned away from would ultimately be her calling card that would allow her to empower others to share their own voices of strength, of hope, and of inspiration. Now, the path to the nonprofit organization she founded started during a year-long educational trip that took her around the world to witness how children lived in areas like Africa and Southeast Asia. And what Laura experienced on that trip altered her mindset permanently and served as the foundation for her nonprofit called You're Just My Type. Laura and I dive a little bit into the time after her diagnosis and the incredible support she had from family, as well as the lasting relationships she developed in diabetes camp. She then takes us on a journey of how photography entered her life and how she used it to travel to some of the most interesting places on the planet. She also talks about how those experiences completely shaped her mindset. We then zero in on how art can be used to create a healthier life through storytelling, connecting with others from around the world with similar conditions, and helping to educate and motivate the world to make change for the better. This is a super interesting conversation about the arts. It's about being human and about being part of something greater than ourselves. So let's get into my conversation with photographer and storyteller, Laura Pavlakovich.
Pavlakovich. It's very phonetic when you look at it's like Pavlok, like a key lock. Pavlakovich.
I got you. I'm gonna try so hard not to mess that up, but
it's okay. It happens every time. So
Pavlakovich.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Awesome. So we're
it's
recording.
Okay if you need to do. Okay.
No, we're totally cool. I'm just actually going to use this as the intro because I think this is totally flavor. So, hey, Laura. So we're talking to Laura Pavlakovich, and
Yes.
I really want to thank you for just sitting down with me today. We got together online. I reached out to you, and we were talking about your lightning speed of responding to me. And I'm just going to take it as you responded to me really fast because you
No
liked
one
my
else.
email. Awesome.
Hmm. I was most excited about yours,
I
so.
appreciate it. Thank you. So this is going to be a really interesting conversation because most of my interviews are really that I've done so far have been primarily focused on the obvious stuff in health and wellness. You know, we talk about diet, we talk about nutrition, but our discussion today will definitely be a little different. While I definitely want to talk to you a little bit about how you take care of yourself, everybody does it in a little different way. A core of what we're really going to talk about today is this interesting crossroads between art and health, and then ultimately how we can tap into the power of art to actually connect and heal and thrive. So I'm looking forward to diving into that with you, and thanks for being here.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Cool. So I usually start off the conversation with a question that I ask pretty much everybody because I really feel it tells me a lot about who you are as an adult, right? So first, I want to understand where you grew up, and then second, I'd love to know what type of kid you really were.
I grew up in Redondo Beach, California. Very quaint little beach town. Very small. I went to a private school. I was the only diabetic at my school. It was great. It's a bubble. Redondo Beach is a very beautiful bubble that nobody wants to leave for a reason that I kind of forced myself to get out of.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about the some of the stuff that you did to kind of escape the bubble because I think that and
Very drastic measures. I took very drastic measures to escape the bubble.
yeah, we'll definitely talk about that because it definitely shapes who you are as a person, right? So, so you were diagnosed, you said early on, you said you were the only diabetic in your school, and
Yeah.
you were diagnosed around the age of 4, and you
Hmm.
spent a couple days in the hospital, not atypical, especially when we were kids. And from what I read, you spent a lot of time injecting oranges so you can get out of the hospital and kind of figure that whole thing out. And your family at that time was adjusting to kind of this new reality of having a young person with diabetes, right?
They were, yeah. No one else in my family has it. My mom would come. I got put on the insulin pump when I was 6 years old. I believe I was one of the youngest in America to be put on it, and my mom would come to school every day and test my blood sugar for me, and I got very used to that. And then one day she said it was in her head. She said it was time for me to learn myself, so she told the school she wasn't able to make it, which I later found out she was just saying that so that I would be forced to learn how to do it. And so they told me she wasn't going to make it, and I had no choice but to do it myself. So I tested my own blood sugar, and ever since that day, I was a very independent diabetic child.
Do you think that formed your mentality as a person in general? Because, like, look, that's a very adult thing to have to do when you're that age.
Right.
You have your own health in your own hands at that point. So it's like, does that shape you as a person for some of the decisions that you're making in life and how you're kind of reacting towards things as well?
I'm sure it did. I'm very grateful that she did that. I see some families now where I mean, it's hard. You want to baby your child, but there comes a point where you're going to have to let them run free and have to trust that they're going to know what to do in all types of situations.
No doubt.
But no, yeah, my mom was great. We'd go on field trips, and my mom would make Crystal Light popsicles on days when the other kids would get ice cream. So I was always involved in all the snacks.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, it was very sweet.
So I actually read on your website that you were, and you mentioned the word grateful just a moment ago, and I read on your website, which we'll talk about that in more detail in a moment, that you were actually grateful for your diagnosis at a young age. Now, I look at that, and I've told my story before, and I've kind of put it out there. I was diagnosed as an adult, and I oftentimes think how grateful and how fortunate I was because I was able to lead a quote unquote normal childhood, normal
Right.
young adulthood without diabetes. Now, and when I look at parents and kids who are managing type 1 at a very young age, I have a massive level of empathy and I totally kind of I feel for them to a certain extent because I know what I go through on a day-to-day basis. So you know the challenges that everybody faces, the nighttime lows, the emergencies that we face. So talk to me about why you feel that you're so grateful for being diagnosed at such a young age.
I just simply can't imagine knowing a normal life, knowing a non-diabetic life, and then all of a sudden having to transition. And I photograph people today where they tell me that they remember their last meal, that they didn't have to count their carbohydrates and think about their blood sugar, and that would eat me up inside. This is my life. Like, this has always been my life. I've never eaten a meal where I wasn't counting the carbohydrates and getting insulin for it. And it's just like really hard for me to fathom. Like, I have so much respect for you guys and people diagnosed later in life, because that transition to me just seems a lot harder than really no transition at all for me.
Sure. So you mentioned a little bit about your mom in terms of the support and then what she did for you to kind of boost you off the edge there, so you grew up a little faster in terms of taking care of your own diabetes.
Yes.
So your mom developed, aside from making the ice pops for the field trips and stuff like that, your mom did something pretty cool when you were younger in terms of developing a support group.
Yeah, she started her very own support group called the South Bay Hot Shots. And we met at a park. I don't remember how often, I'm sure at least once a month. And it was awesome. I met friends that I still know to this day. People that it's so funny, they're even reaching out now because they want to be on my website. But it was like this, the parents would be able to talk and vent to each other and talk about their struggles. And then I remember so specifically this kid, every time it was like this show and tell, and he would get on the stage and give himself a shot with his mouth, like using nothing but his mouth. So like no hands involved. And it was just kind of this like, it was great. We were all really young, and I'm very grateful that she did that for me. And that's part of the reason why I like the feeling of isolation that people get when getting diagnosed. I've never felt that.
Sure. So aside from your mom doing all those cool things for you when you were little, did you have one person you think that, as you're looking back, was probably the most influential person for you growing up?
I don't think so. It was this group, and then I went to Camp Conrad Chinnock. And so I had this support group that I would get once a summer, but year round, I don't think I had one person that was kind of there for me diabetes wise besides family members.
Well, even outside of the diabetes world, were there certain things that you kind of looked to in terms of influences when you were a kid?
Good question. I mean, I have an older brother who's 4 years older, and I've always looked up to him in every way, shape, and form. I always say we're the same person, just different genders. But yeah, he would always give shots for me. There was never, like I said, I was very independent. I kind of led the group.
Gotcha. So here's a question for you, a little off topic, but I'm just really curious to understand this. If you had to choose one in terms of how you would describe yourself, optimist, pessimist, or realist?
Realist, 100%.
Why do you say that?
I've seen, I don't want to jump to anything different, but I left at age 17 to do a photojournalism program that was based in Germany. And it's
actually a perfect segue, because
my
next question was what was life after high school like for you?
Okay, because I bet before this program I was an optimist, being raised in Redondo Beach. At 17, I didn't know what I wanted to do when I graduated. I was all set to go to the Academy of Art in San Francisco and study photography. I knew I wanted to study photography. But then I had a friend who sent me a link to this program and said, "This is for you. Like, this was made for you. You need to look into this." And I did. And it was called Youth with a Mission. And my base was in Germany, and it was focused on injustice and poverty, but it was also a photography school. And I watched the video for it, and it just brought me to tears. And it was everything that I ever wanted to do. And I didn't know that it was out there. And so 2 weeks later, I got on an airplane and I went to Germany, and we lived in this castle. And the entire basement of the castle was turned into a dark room, and for us to develop our film. And it was wild. We showed up. We knew that we'd be going on different trips throughout this one big trip, but we showed up, and they said that we were going to Egypt in 2 weeks. 2 weeks after we got there, with kids that we had just met. I was the youngest one there, and I was also the only and first type 1 diabetic they had ever had at their school. So we went to Egypt, and we lived in white sand deserts and rented Jeeps and went to Bedouin villages every day and took photos of children there. And then we'd go back to Germany. And then I went to Paris, and I worked with drug addicts and prostitutes, trying to understand their stories and help them and support them and get them out. And I fought against human trafficking and child prostitution in Thailand. And I worked at a government orphanage in China. and I saw things that most 17-year-olds do not see. And
Okay, hold that thought for a second, because there's a lot wrapped into
I
there right
know
there.
it's a long, I know it was a, it was
So
a and it,
I just want to back up for just one second. So what
mhm.
was what you said the video was that you saw describing this program at the beginning? What was it about that video that drew you to this program?
It was these students in Africa with this backdrop in this village taking portraits of these African children. And something like I don't even remember the words being said. I just remember seeing this and knowing that that's where I wanted to be.
Yeah, I love that, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the impact that the pictures have, and we'll talk about
Hmm.
that in a second too.
Sure.
Okay, so you spend time in Europe, you spend time in Africa, you spend
Yeah.
time in other parts of the world, seeing injustice,
Right.
documenting it.
And it wasn't a glamorous trip. And so coming home, I think especially when I was so young and my mind was so open and like ready to be molded, it definitely takes a toll on you. I mean, I saw a lot of stuff, and if a situation like that doesn't make you a realist, then I don't know.
So
Well,
without being too, and you can get as detailed as you like, but I'm really interested to understand. So if there's one thing that you could pick out of that trip that had the biggest impact on you from just an experience perspective, would you be able to share
uh,
that?
yeah, of course. So they took us to Thailand. So we'd be in Germany and they would present trips to us with what we'd be able to do over there, and we could put our top three trips on a piece of paper and they would separate us into teams. So one of them was Thailand to fight against human trafficking, and so that's what I put down. And we showed up and the staff members sat us down and said, we can't go into the red light district. This trip is changing. It's too dangerous. Instead, we're going to be building these cafes for ladyboys to give them a job. And me and a couple friends were a little upset because we went for a reason and we were all very passionate about human trafficking and stopping it. And so we took a bus every night by ourselves and went into these red light districts to figure out what we could do to get these little girls out of these clubs and bars. And it was terrifying, and we didn't really have anyone like telling us the steps to take. So we met with different nonprofits and organizations that were made for getting these girls out and then like teaching them trades so that they could get different jobs in society. But it's all like very corrupt and twisted. And a lot of the girls that we met in there, their moms owned the strip clubs that they were working in. And so it's so they they have cops. They're okay. Sorry, let me just backtrack for a second. And I don't know if we want to use all this, but like in Thailand, there are all these rules where you have to be like 18 to dance and 21 to strip, and those laws are in place. However, the cops working in the red light districts are all paid off, so they have it down to like a science where if they find out a government official is coming in, they have the exact time to like tell the owner of the club, the paid off cops, to tell the owner of the club to like walk upstairs to tell the girls to put clothes on, and nothing ever happens. And these organizations we were meeting with to get these girls out required a parental signature, which made no sense because either these moms are the ones putting their kids here or the parents had no idea that these are where their kids were. So Thailand was the hardest. It took a huge toll on me. It was really hard. So the only thing we were able to do was go into these bars and act as cut like try to blend in, and then we would pay these girls bar fees every night and take them out and like take them to the movies and take them to the mall and give them food, but every night we'd have to return them. So it was not a fun. It was one of the most help. Like it's hard to like, recognize the fact that we were helping them when it doesn't feel like we did enough.
Well, I guess even the small amount of help that you were providing to them for that short period of time was changing their lives in some way. But you're right, you're returning them right back into the belly of the beast as soon as you're done with
And
them.
you have no other choice. So
Yeah, that's pretty
yeah, that
tough.
was the toughest. That was the trip that stood out the most. China was the most rewarding. We got to live on like government property in this like very westernized orphanage, and we weren't allowed to take pictures in Thailand in the red light district, but in China we were there to take photos of these kids. And every day like we woke up and they would be like go to a nursery and love these kids, and it was the best month and a half of my life. And there was this terminal floor there of these kids that they weren't sure if they were going to make it, and I was the only one that wasn't that didn't get sick on the trip, so I was able to go up and take portraits of all of the kids there to go on their website, and they turned them into these like beautiful black and white canvases to go all over the orphanage. And it was amazing and beautiful, and all of the trips I went on I'll never forget. I can like put myself back there like it was yesterday.
So how long was it that you were away? And then, so you were 17 when you left
Yeah, I turned 18 while I was there. I was only gone for a year.
for a year. Okay. And then,
Hmm.
so that's a significant 12-month period of your life that completely kind of flipped
Yeah.
the switch in you in terms of how you're viewing the world.
Oh my God. Yeah, you think your problems exist until you step off the plane in a third world country and everything that I thought mattered didn't stand a chance.
I want to transition to talking about kind of how you're using that background in the project that you launched not
Okay.
too long ago. But maybe we'll just shift gears just for a second. That was super heavy, and I really
I
appreciate
know.
you sharing that. But no, it's really important because it helps me to understand. It helps everybody to understand exactly who you are and why you're doing what you're doing right now as
Hmm.
well. Um, so maybe we could just switch gears just for a second. So um, I love to talk about kind of your day to day now as an as an adult, removed
Sure.
a little bit physically from those trips. So everyone has habits that shape them, right? Are there It also kind of helps us keep us on the path of being well. So, do you have like daily habits or routines that you do every single day that kind of contribute to your overall health and well-being, or you just kind of wing it every day and you're just going as you feel?
I'm a very routine person, but I don't have I mean, it's funny, and I don't know how cheap this is, but I subscribe to this thing online and they're called the Notes from the Universe.
Okay,
And have you heard of them?
I've heard of it. I've never been there though.
So
No.
every morning they send the same people the same notes, but every morning they email you with this like very inspiring message that like every day, like the first thing I do is wake up and check my email just to read this message and I'll put my phone down and they're just like very spiritual and like all about the universe like being on your side and that's how I like to live my life. It's very much like thoughts become things and that's truly what I believe in.
Sure. Do you spend time in any sort of contemplative practice like meditation or yoga or anything like that? Because it's very
I do
kind of
not.
similar.
I do not. I have a hard time. My brain works a little too fast for yoga. I've tried. I work out. I run as a way to get as a huge stress reliever.
Yeah, I run a little bit too. I definitely don't consider myself a runner,
Right, me neither. But I try.
but you do run.
I
Awesome.
do run. I do run. I just
Okay,
don't like it.
gotcha. Okay, so look, let's switch back for a second because you're taking this experience that you have from your travels when you're 17, 18 years old. You're coming back to the States, and let's fast forward a little bit to this concept of photography for you. So you started taking pictures when? When did photography kind of come into the mix for you?
I've always had this very creative eye ever since I was younger. I don't draw by any means now, but when I was younger, anytime I was asked to illustrate or draw a picture of anything, since the first time I've drawn a picture, I would draw it from an aerial point of view. And I've just always had this very weird perspective on things. Photography always came really easy to me. I don't remember a time not being interested in it, but I didn't start taking like real pictures until this trip, the photography school I went to.
Was there anybody that influenced you to look at the photography part of it, or was it just something that you said, "Let me try this"?
Well, Annie Leibovitz is my favorite photographer out there. I always love what she said. I have her autobiography, and she wrote that she traveled so much with her family. Her father was in the military, and she would sit in the back seat of her car driving to all these new places. And so she would always look out the front window of the car and she would see it as kind of a frame for pictures. So as she was driving, everything she saw was already in a frame. And I loved that so much. And so that's kind of how I see things now.
So you're are you constantly looking at the world in terms of the world being framed? Is that your vision on the
Kind
world?
of, I just there's people you meet who are always like put your phones down, like really take in the moment. But for me, like taking a photo of the moment so I don't forget is a little more important to me.
Gotcha. So at the beginning, if you can recall back, you were using photography as kind of this social. Um, I don't want to use the word as experiment because that sounds like it's light, and that's not what I mean
Hmm.
by it. But you're using it as a tool to achieve something at the beginning, document somebody's life, expose or express what they're going through, and really kind of share that story with others. Was there a therapeutic component to photography for you as well?
Absolutely. I think it must be how writers feel when, or simple, like, or a journalist, you're able to tell a story that most people would never be able to see. And for me, I would do that by taking a photo of the exact situation and being able to share it with people.
Sure. So,
Yeah, it feels good.
I would say I'm an amateur photographer. I love taking photos with my phone more than anything. Uh,
Well, you can now. The cameras are so nice on there.
yeah, it's pretty remarkable. And then you have all these different lenses you could pop on, especially with the iPhone. So it's pretty cool.
Hmm.
So you then kind of combined your love of photography, and then this kind of renewed kind of entry point into the world of type 1, right? Because we talked a little bit before we got online about this fact that, type 1, although it was part of you, it really wasn't a part of you necessarily for a while, right?
No, it wasn't. Yeah, I mean, I went to camp every summer. I had that support group that my mom started, and then it was like I got into high school, I got off the insulin pump because I was tired of people asking me about it, and I went back on to insulin pens, and it just wasn't something I ever wanted people to think of when they thought about me. And so I went off, I did this program, I came home, and I knew I wanted to use my photography to make a difference. I didn't know how. Back in Redondo Beach, everyone was taking photos of sunsets and dolphins, and they were beautiful pictures, but they weren't making a big enough difference for the kind of impact that I wanted to make. And I was lost for a long time, not knowing what I wanted to do. And I took a year off and I moved to Denver and I met new people, and I still just tried to like find my place in this world. And it wasn't until I moved back 2 years ago. This was just in 2015, and I was at this wedding, and the photographer of the wedding was in the middle of this conversation with us, and she had no idea I was type 1 diabetic. And she was like, I have to leave. My son is 4 years old. He was just diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and he has a hard time at night. I need to go be with him. He just feels alone and he gets scared. And the earth stopped as she said this, and everything kind of fell into place for me. And I couldn't even, like, there was like a good 30 seconds like I couldn't even hear anything. It just, like, my future unfolded in my head, and I was like, this is it. Like, this is what I'm here to do. I need to take photos of as many type 1 diabetics so kids like him don't feel alone.
And ultimately, you ended up calling that "You're Just My Type," right?
You're just my type, yes. And You're Just My Type was born.
So let's talk about that for a second, because you started this. It's a nonprofit,
Yeah,
and
yeah, a recent nonprofit.
a recent nonprofit. Okay, so
Hmm.
that was the catalyst for you. What really kind of shook you there? Let's go into that for a second, because there's clearly an emotion that it evoked in you.
Right, I guess. I mean, I'm sure there's so many variables to it. I'm sure it's the fact that I was that young when I was diagnosed. I think it was realizing that I had it so good to where I didn't feel that type of isolation, which made me want to end it for other people even more. It was the fact that I thought finally realized that these people who are getting diagnosed now, you can show them statistics on a computer and numbers, and it won't do anything for them. I needed to put a face to this invisible disease. And I mean, it was finally the only thing that made sense to me. It was a really good moment.
Well, clearly it sparked a pretty amazing project for you, and so I was looking at your website, and I always look back at, if it's a blog, I look back at the first post that somebody puts
Mhm.
up, or if it's a podcast, I like to listen to the first episode that somebody puts up, because it really kind of tells a lot about what they were thinking about during that time, and it shows how it's evolved over time. So the first person you featured was a girl named Kara from Long
Yes.
Beach. So can you recall what kind of made you choose her as your first subject?
Yeah, there's not some long story. She was my coworker's roommate, and I started talking about this idea I had, and my coworker said, "My roommate's type 1," and I was like, "Let me take her picture." And so I did, and that kind of sparked everything else. I mean, how I got the others, it's a good story. If so I had this idea for You're Just My Type for probably a good 4 months, and I would talk about it and get excited, and then other people would get excited. I was like, yeah, I'm doing something. And then I'd go to bed at night. I'm like, you haven't done anything yet. You're just talking about it. You need to do something. So I wrote a letter. I wrote this cover letter just saying my name, and that I wasn't asking for money. I was just asking for faces. I was just asking for people to photograph with type 1. And I sat there and I just Googled type 1 diabetes nonprofits and organizations. And I clicked on the contact tab of every website. I had no idea where this letter was going, but I sent it to probably 50 different websites. And then the same week, I had gone to I had gone to diabetes camp with a friend of mine named Ryan, and we follow each other on social media, but we're not close. I didn't know what he did for a living. I get an email from him saying, "Hey, I just received your email. This is such a great idea." And in my head, I'm like, "What do you mean you just received my email? Like, I don't have your email address. What are you talking about?" And he happened to be the head of the board of directors for this nonprofit called Padre, which is a nonprofit for type 1 youth in Orange County, California. And he said, "This is great. We're having a parent night this Thursday." It was like 3 days later. And he's like, "Show up, bring a sign up sheet, and I'll handle the rest." So I did. And it was so terrifying. I was like, oh boy, this is really happening right now. But I showed up. I was too nervous to talk. I hate to admit that. But he kind of explained how I explained it in the beginning was like I was very one track minded about just wanting to do a photo book. I love photo books. My whole apartment is filled with just coffee table photography books. It's my favorite thing to look at. And so that's what I wanted to do was make this coffee table book of type 1 diabetics. And so that's what I told people. I showed up with a sign-up sheet. Ryan said, if you guys are interested in having your kids be involved, meet her at the door. And that night I got probably 75 signatures of people wanting me to photograph their kids. And so that's how it really all started.
That's really cool. So that's actually a perfect
Yeah.
example of what you were talking about, is that if you think about it and you put it out there in
Right.
the universe, it's going to come back to you, right?
Yeah. And it seems like every situation since then in my life has been just like that.
Well, that's kind of how it works a lot of times, though. If you really think about it, you have to think it,
Hmm.
believe it before it actually is created in the real world.
Exactly.
So how now are you identifying the people that you are taking pictures of and kind of featuring?
99% of them reach out to me. I went and conquered that list of people that signed up. And then I started asking the parents to repost on their Facebook. And then probably 3 months in, I started waking up to about 25 emails every morning of people wanting to share their stories on the website. And it has not stopped since.
So they're keeping you really busy. That's great.
Yeah, they're keeping me busy. And it's great. It's so funny. In the beginning, people were like, well, can you do anything next month? Like, are you booked? And I'm like, what? I can do you next week. Like, it was not. And now I'm like, okay, yeah, I can fit you in 2 months. And it just doesn't seem real. But the calendar just keeps getting more filled, more filled.
That's so great. So you're interacting with all these people throughout the past few years, all walks of life. They have one common thread, that being type 1 diabetes.
Hmm.
Are you able to pick out maybe one or two traits that you're recognizing that they all share?
I, I've been thinking about this question. And it's really, this is what I want to say about that. It's like you can tell your loved ones what it feels like to be low and what it feels like to be high. You can try like your hardest to explain. They can try with every fiber in their body to understand what you're feeling. But when I go and meet these other type 1s, without even saying a word, like just knowing that they know what I would be talking about or that they have felt the same things. And I guess it's just so extreme. Like it's something that is so impossible to explain and that you don't have to them just creates this instant connection every single time, every single time. And just, it makes it so easy. It's a really special thing. Like if we need to think about the good that comes from this disease, there's not a lot of people that get to have that like level of connection with other human beings like we get to have with other type 1 diabetics.
Yeah, no doubt. And let's kind of take that into a conversation about photography and pictures in general, because you can look, there's pictures all over the internet now. Instagram is one of my favorite places to hang out. I've said that too many times before on this podcast, but I'm a big fan of the visual arts and music and things like that. But if somebody posts online a picture of what they're going through, whether it's their glucometer or their Dexcom or whatever it might be, without, it doesn't make a difference where they are in the world, right?
Exactly.
You just automatically know exactly what they're going through at that period of time based on the number.
Right. And I've had people like I'm on my Insta, like you're just my type's Instagram all the time. I look at every new follower that I get, and my favorite have been when it's like, I'll look at their profile. They're clearly like from somewhere like the Middle East. I don't understand a word that is on their page, but their first picture is of a like a glucose meter, I'm like, okay, we're family. Like everything, like now everything you post will make a little bit more sense to me. And it's just this like really, it's like it's a language. I mean, seeing these pictures of diabetes supplies is just this really special common language we all share
No doubt.
through pictures only.
Well, that's the question. So we've been talking about the ability for photography, art to kind of level the playing field and kind of heal to a certain extent because there's a lot of people out there that don't have the kind of maybe support that you might have had earlier on, or if I
Hmm.
might have had when I was an adult. Um, we can definitely use art to educate people. We can use it to develop connections with people. We can develop it and show that imperfection is okay. It's okay not to be perfect all the time.
Right.
Um,
And that a blood sugar number is not a grade.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. We can use it to demonstrate kind of a spectrum of emotions, including strength. Um, and all that is done without uttering a single word.
Exactly.
So do you, and you kind of alluded to this, but do you feel that art truly has the ability to kind of heal and ultimately help us thrive?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. But just like I've been saying, it doesn't take words. It doesn't take age. It doesn't take you to be similar to the person in any other way, but seeing this photo of them showing that they have diabetes or showing them put their infusion site in has to be healing. It's healing to me.
So what's the ultimate goal for your Just My Type? I know you said the coffee book was initially the coffee table
Right.
book. That was initially the goal, but that's clearly not the only goal right now.
No, I want to go back to every corner of the earth that I've been to already and that I haven't been to already. I want to photograph type 1 diabetics that would never have a chance to share their story. I That's what I'm most passionate about is going to these people that aren't necessarily on social media and can post something and relate to other people or go on and see to relate to other people. I want to be able to share their stories. And so that's another reason why I incorporated as a nonprofit was to raise money to be able to travel to these places. So as much as I want to conquer LA and travel the rest of the US and continue this project, I want to go back to these Bedouin villages and show these kids with the disease too and show them how many others there are like them.
Well, it's a global issue. It's a global issue. It
It's a
impacts
global issue,
everybody,
yeah.
and it's growing tremendously. So, a little off topic, but not really. Speaking of art, if anybody's kind of seen pictures of you online or your videos online, you have some very nice artwork on your arm.
Thank you.
And I've always been drawn to body art, and I'm not trying to embarrass you here. That's not my point here,
No.
but um, I've been drawn to body art because my grandfather, years ago, he grew up in New York City, early 1900s, and he had sleeves. He was totally tattooed by kind of one of the most influential tattoo artists at that time. Actually, I don't know if you have any knowledge of kind of tattoo history. The guy's name is Charlie Wagner, and if you look him up online, he was kind of the guy on the Bowery in New York City back in that time.
Hmm.
So when I see tattoos, I'm always interested in the story behind the art, right? So can you maybe share a story or two of your tattoos?
Of course. Well, my first one, I can show you. I wish the listeners could see. My first one was my medical alert tattoo. I never wore my medical alert bracelet, and it was my mother's idea to go out and get it tattooed on my wrist in case something happened to me. So I think that started the tattoo addiction. Can you see in the camera
I
right
can, yeah.
now? Okay.
I'll
So
put some
this is
pictures up on the website too, just to
okay.
associate
Or
with you.
yeah, I'll send you some too. This is a camera I got after my school. It's a map of the world inside of a 35 millimeter film camera.
Well, the story behind that is quite obvious now, knowing what I know about you. That's a
Right.
really cool tattoo. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, this one is one of my favorites. The rest, I just I like I like pretty pictures. Um, Not all of them have a super deep meaning. I kind of got four different pieces started when I lived in Denver and I came home and just have been adding to them ever since.
All
Those are
good.
my two favorite ones. Yeah, so I have a reminder every day. The back of my arm says, name 10 things you want to do before you die, and then go do them,
Can you say
which
that?
is,
Can you say that one more time?
yes, it says, name 10 things you want to do before you die, and then go do them.
That's such a
Which,
that's such a perfect thing to have on your arm.
It's funny because I can't, it's upside down to me, but I know what it says.
Yeah, I was going to say, shouldn't it be backwards so at least you can look in the
I know,
mirror?
but it's so other people can read it. I know what it says. I think about it every day, but it's just, I mean, one of my favorite quotes is it's never too early to start beefing up your obituary. So I'm just constantly thinking of if I had a bucket list and crossing those things off every day.
Yeah, one of my favorite, actually, one of the things that I live by, you ever see Dead Poets Society, the movie with
Yes.
Rob? Yeah. So I that's one of my favorite movies, and Carpe Diem is probably one of my favorite very short sayings. You have to live life to its fullest every single day because you never know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah, I love it. I have the words welcome home on near the bottom of my foot as like a reminder that everywhere you step, you can make your home. Just lots of little reminders. I'm like one post-it note, I guess.
Super cool. Super cool. Cool. So I want to make sure everyone listening checks out not only your artwork on your arm, but also as your website and all of your social media stuff. I know you got a lot of people following you, but where can everybody connect with you?
So my website is you'rejustmytype.com, and then on Instagram it's at you'rejustmytype1.
And I'll make sure that's in the show notes. People can also go to your website to donate to the nonprofit now, which will help you
Yes.
fulfill this real need to actually document a lot of this stuff from different parts of the world. So if you're listening and you want to donate to Laura's nonprofit, I'll have that link on the website as well.
Thank
So
you.
just a couple of final questions, and I know that you're busy, and I'm going to let you go. And I really appreciate you talking to me and
Of
sharing all
course.
this
Of
stuff.
course. Thank you for having me.
So, what is the single best piece of advice that anyone has ever given you?
This is hard. You always put people on the spot like this.
I'm sorry.
Well, okay, I need a second to think about this. Hmm. Actually, let me read it to you. Give me one second. Okay, so the quote that is on my personal Instagram bio profile says, "Be afraid to die until you've scored some victory for humanity," which I love and live by.
So, be afraid to die
Until you've scored some victory for humanity.
means you got to do something for the rest of the world.
Yeah, I just don't want to leave this place without making a difference.
Definitely making a difference with what you're doing.
Thank you.
Last question. What is your definition of the word brave?
Oh my God, I think it is so relative. I think waking up. It's waking up and getting through a full day. I mean, we all have fears and anxieties and struggles. We all do. It doesn't matter what you're going through, what walk you are in life. And I think it's just getting through the day and knowing that tomorrow is a new one.
Thank you. Laura, so thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
Thank you.
I love everything you're doing through You're Just My Type, and you're sharing so many stories of others touched by diabetes and how they've overcome their own daily battles. And I really appreciate you sharing your story on the podcast because you don't get to do that necessarily through your own work. You're sharing everybody else's
Correct.
story. So thank you.
Well, thank you.
So if you guys are interested in learning more about Laura Pavlakovich, which I got that right,
Yes.
her nonprofit, You're Just My Type, or connecting with her, please head over to thebravestlife.com/010. Yes, we're in the double digits now. And Laura, you're the double digit episode, which is cool.
Nice.
Check out all the details on today's show and links to things we discussed in the show notes. You'll also find Laura's social media details there if you want to connect with her that way. As always, I want to thank all of you for joining us for this episode of The Bravest Podcast. If you like what we're doing here, please be sure to share this episode with someone you love. Again, the link for this episode is thebravestlife.com/010. Also, please don't forget to head over to iTunes to leave a review. It would mean so much if you would take just a few minutes of your day, head over there, share your thoughts on what we've done so far. And that's really a great place to share the love with anyone impacted, not only by diabetes, but anyone trying to take life head on and really kind of create the healthiest version of themselves. Great interview, Laura. Thank you. Thanks again,
Thank
everybody.
you.
I'm Craig, and we'll catch you next time on the Bravest Podcast.